Hi, my name is Carmen and welcome back to Tomes and Textiles. My channel is dedicated to all the best in Latina literature, and I am helping you read past the bestseller list one book recommendation at a time. You may know me from TikTok or Instagram or Threads or Facebook, but this is a channel that I am challenging myself this month of January 2026 to post one YouTube video every single day. I don't know that I'm going to get through it, and I'm going to give myself some grace, but today I am super excited to announce the fact that I will be doing a Latine book bingo challenge this year with my book club. If you don't know, I have a book club called Bien Leidos Book Club. It is located on Bindery. You can go and follow me there. You can follow me for free or at any level. We meet on Discord and we talk all month about our book selection as well as our hobbies and lives and all sorts of stuff. So it is a very safe and inclusive space, and this month we're talking about Orange Wine by Esperanza Hope Snyder. Orange Wine is a historical fiction taking place in Colombia in the 1950s, and the first line of the book is sort of explosive. While I was giving birth to Lucy, my husband Alessandro was lying in bed with my sister Isabel. The story follows Inés Camargo from that point in her life forward, and it is about her taking the bitterness of her life and creating a new one. If you want to read with us this month, I have the link to my bindery down below. Just go ahead and join at any level. There are paid levels and a free level, and you will get a link to the Discord book club. It's been almost 2 years since I started my Bien Leidos Book Club, so this year I wanted to add another element to it. It is my 2026 Latine Reading Bingo Challenge. The goal of this bingo challenge is to get you to read the full spectrum of Latine joy while also expanding your horizons in lengths of book, locations of book, as well as representation and genres that you may not have read any Latine literature in. Today I wanted to go through some book recommendations for each of the bingo spots to share with you some books that I would recommend you read. The first slot is literary fiction, and not only is Orange Wine, our January book club pick, one of those, but I have two recommendations that released last year. The first is My Train Leaves at 3 by Natalie Guerrero. This is Natalie's debut literary fiction novel, and I read it at the end of last year and I absolutely loved it. It features an Afro-Latina who wants to become a Broadway performer in the lead role, if you will. But this was just an absolutely fantastic literary fiction taking place in New York City, and it gets really dark, but it's just so powerfully and beautifully written. I'm actually going to do a review of this one as well as the next book recommendation I'm going to give you soon, so you can hear more about those. Another 2025 release that falls under the literary fiction umbrella is Jaquita Diaz's This Is the Only Kingdom. This is a book that follows a mother and daughter, and there has been a murder. They're in Puerto Rico, and again, another lush and beautiful literary fiction that really goes deep into the self and explores the characters very deeply. I'll be reviewing both of these soon if you want to hear more about them. The next spot on the bingo card is books over 500 pages. So the first book I recommend is a fantasy called The Sun and the Void. This is by Gabriela Romero La Cruz. This book is a fantasy that takes place in a sort of Venezuelan fantasy world. It is sapphic and it is just very fast moving. The second book in this duology actually released last year, so this is a completed duology. You can pick up this one and read it, and then read the second book in the novel and get the whole series under your belt. The second over 500 page book I recommend you pick up is Our Share of Night by Mariana Enriquez. This is sort of like a father-son road trip taking place in this sort of witchy, macabre world. It is dark. It is bloody. There are so many things that unravel in this novel, but in true Mariana Enriquez fashion, she does it so beautifully, and her writing is great. The horror elements are just scary enough for me, a scary cat, to get through it without like having total nightmares. Because every single book behind me is by a Latine author, I will probably do a couple versions of this video throughout the year highlighting like newer releases and older releases, so just keep that in mind as I continue to go through these genres. The next tile on the bingo card is dystopian, and I can really only think of one right now, but it was like one of my top tier 2025 YA reads. And that book recommendation is These Vengeful Gods by Gabe Cole Novoa. This is basically a Latine Hunger Games featuring a non-binary main character who has this tournament of the gods in order to free their uncles. This is very fast-paced. It is a single book and it is for readers of all ages. You will see so many different parallels to today. Next up, we have one of my favorite categories, translated literature, and I'm featuring two books that are on my 2026 TBR. The first is Death Takes Me by Cristina Rivera Garza. If you read Liliana's Invincible Summer, then this is a sort of literary fiction fictionalization of that story. There is someone going around murdering men and it sounds very intriguing, and this is a wonderful work of literary fiction from Mexico. And then we have La Lucha, Latin American Feminism Today. This is from Charco Press and it is an anthology that they released last year. I am so excited to read this because there are translated works by Isabel Allende, Valeria Luiselli, Gloria Pinheiro, Cristina Rivera Garza, Jamali Ribeiro, Rita Segato, and others. So I am really excited to bring this into my reading this year, and I think some people who are interested in reading feminism that isn't like US focused would be interested in this one for sure. The next square is Modern Contemporary, and I have two recommendations for that. The first book is our February Bien Leidos Book Club pick, Sparks Fly by Zakia and Jamal. This book features an Afro-Cuban woman who decides to lose her V card in a sex club. What could possibly go wrong, except for the person that she's attracted to there ends up being someone that she works with at her new job. I am so excited to read this next month, so definitely pick it up and join us for Bien Leidos in February if you haven't already joined us. Then a contemporary novel taking place in New York City called Middle Spoon by Alejandro Varela. We follow our narrator who is part of this like dream relationship, and they get broken up with, and then they kind of start to spiral. This story focuses on mental health, it focuses on parenthood, and it focuses like on unconventional relationships you don't traditionally see in US lit. I really loved this book. It was so full of heart and it was so funny at times, but in a way that was like masking like the tears that you should have been shedding. Anyway, this is highly unusual and interesting story, so character driven and compelling, so I highly recommend you pick up Middle Spoon. Starting off the second row, we have fantasy. So I don't think that I could make a recommendation list and not recommend Sylvia Morna Garcia, so I'm going to recommend my favorite book by her called Gods of Jade and Shadow. This is an Art Deco road trip through Mexico featuring a young girl who just wants to get out of her small town and away from her abusive cousin and grandfather and the literal god of death. It is such a romantic and epic story because it takes us all across Mexico in the 1920s, and it is most definitely not a romance, so do not believe what anyone tells you. If they tell you this is a romance, they are absolutely wrong and you will be severely disappointed. And then I have a book that's on my 2026 radar. It is called Salvacion by Sandra Proudman. This is a gender swap retelling of Zorro, and it is a YA fantasy novel, and it just sounds so good, so feminist, so motivating. So I hope you will pick this up with me this year. Maybe we could do a side buddy read in the book club. Our next square is set in North America, and I was just laughing to myself picking out these books because it's like, oh, well, the first one I'm going to tell you about can be like a horror book, and the second one can be like a fantasy. So you'll see that a lot of these recommendations can go for a couple of the squares on the bingo card, but what I'm hoping to is kind of give you a broad view and hopefully introduce you to a few Latinx books that you haven't heard of before. The first set in North America novel is this Florida Gothic called Myra by Nikki Gonzalez. This is sort of like a Rebecca kind of retelling that takes place deep in the Everglades, and it's about like college best frenemies who haven't seen each other for over 10 years. And then Ingrid gets invited to Myra's home deep in the Everglades, and there's all this like body doubling and mirroring. This is just very deeply a gothic novel, and I don't think I've ever read a gothic novel with like Cuban American protagonists, and it's just so good. One of my top reads of 2025. Speaking of top reads of 2025, When the Tides Held the Moon by Vanessa Vida Kelly. We actually read this as part of Bien Leidos Book Club back in the summer, and this is just such a delightful story. It takes place in Coney Island, and again, again, historical fiction, fantasy, taking place in North America. This one's got it all. Because this is a take on the story of The Shape of Water, but it takes place in Coney Island, like in one of these kind of circus situations, and Benny goes to work at the circus building a cage, and as it turns out, he's actually building a cage for Rio, who becomes the love interest. Rio is a merman who has been captured, taken out of the sea, and put into this cage in order to kind of revive the circus. This book is very deeply researched by Vanessa. We had such a great discussion with her actually in book club, and it is just such a beautiful love story. And by the way, Vanessa not only illustrated the cover, but also like all the drawings on the inside, and there are some like really beautiful like cover illustrations, and Vanessa even illustrated like a few pictures inside the book. The next category I am deeply passionate about because I very strongly believe that we should not just be reading Latin literature from 40, 50 years ago. There is so much new and amazing Latinx lit that comes out every single Tuesday. By the way, if you join my bindery, you will also get a newsletter detailing everything about the books that are released every Tuesday to keep you up to date on what's coming out. And so part of the intention of my book club is to read contemporary literature. So in March, we are going to be reading Now I Surrender by Alvaro Enrique. This book actually releases, I think, March 3rd or 4th, March 3rd. And so we're going to be starting book club a few days late that month. But this is a historical fiction taking place in the West, and it kind of questions the entire notion of how the West was won. In true Alvaro Enrique fashion, it's a little bit bonkers because he's also going forward in time to the author who is like living this life that is an extension of the story that's told like as Geronimo is surrendering. And anyway, this is just a amazing work of literary fiction. It comes out March 3rd, and you should join us for book club in March to read it and discuss it because there's going to be quite a bit to talk about. Also releasing in March is Estela and Drowning. This is by Renee Peña Govea, and this is a work of fiction, but it also has a lot of poetry throughout. I haven't read it yet, but it just sounds so good. Let me just read a little bit of the synopsis to you. Estela Morales is one of the only Latinas who tested into San Francisco's most exclusive public high school. In her senior year, Estela wants to keep her head down, eke out a passing grade from her racist Spanish teacher, and get into her dream college. But after placing second in the Latine Heritage Poetry Contest behind a non-Latino student, Estela is thrust into citywide debates about merit, identity, and diversity. Things only get messier when her family is threatened with eviction. As Estela's friends organize against bigotry and her landlady increases the pressure, Estela is suffocating and finds release only in poetry and in a breathless new romance. When tensions finally reach their breaking point, Estela must find a way to undrown herself and the community she loves. I got a little postcard with it, and on the postcard there's a quote that says, "Ahogarse means to drown, but this ahogarse is like to vent, to pour out your feelings." At 7 years old, I took it literally. Mommy was undrowning. Mommy was undrowning, expelling water from her body in the form of tears to save herself. I'm so excited for this contemporary YA fiction, and I hope you'll consider picking it up this year as well. Our next category is historical fiction. Let's start off with a romance that I love this series so much. An Island Princess Starts a Scandal by Adriana Herrera. I love this entire trilogy with all my heart. This is a sapphic love story featuring Manuela and Cora. It takes place in Paris. They're involved in the arts. It's so steamy. Anyway, fantastically written. You can never go wrong with Adriana Herrera, but this one in particular, I think, was the best of the trilogy. And then we have We Are Green and Trembling by Gabriela Cabezon Camara. She just won the National Book Award for this, and I cannot recommend this book enough. This book has two halves. The first half is Antonio de Arasu's story. He is writing to his aunts, but he is actually trans and had escaped from a convent. He is in the New World now in Argentina, what is present-day Argentina, and he is writing to them, and he is proselytizing and kind of participating in colonization through like this religious situation. The first half of the story is actually based on his writings and book that he had written. The second half of the book is about him caring for these two Guarani girls who they go on this journey in the forest, and the green and trembling part comes from there because the descriptions of like the natural beauty are just so beautiful. That part of the story is actually based on a Guarani text that was translated, and I just cannot say enough how revolutionary and just absolutely stunning this book is. It deserves every single award it gets, and you need to read it 100%. And now we are on to horror. I am going to tell you about another Bien Leidos Book Club pick, The Possession of Alba Diaz by Isabel Cañas. I am obsessed by this book. Isabel's books get better and better and better, and I love the notion of this being a strongly feminist horror novel who has elements of horror, but they're not so terribly terrifying that you can't sleep at night. And a lot of them, for me personally, are wrapped in this romance that happens in this book. At the beginning of the novel, we find out that Alba is engaged to her childhood friend Carlos. Then there is this sort of pandemic that happens and they have to get out of the big city that they're in. They go to Carlos's family's small town. It's a mining town. And immediately, like, there are changes in Alba's body. And is she possessed? Is she not? Who knows? What is this title? And this is where we meet Elias, and Alba and Elias have this connection, but Elias has this dark past. He's a convict, he is an outcast from his family, and Isabel just doesn't miss, in my opinion, and this is just a fantastic horror read to be read any month of the year, and it would be a perfect read anytime. Then we have A Haunting in Hialeah by Raul Palma. This is more a psychological horror because what ends up being the scariest element of this is actually like just something that we have to live through in life. I don't want to give too much away, but Hugo Contreras is trying to make ends meet in Miami, and he finds Alexi Ramirez, who by the way is like his absolute nemesis, is in need of someone to help get rid of like this haunting going on in his house. And so this book blends very much the horror aspect with like this whole political commentary, and it is just absolutely brilliant. And I am telling you, I never see this book on anyone's list, and it's like more people need to pick this up. We're starting the third row with set in South America, and let's go to Venezuela, right? This is a contemporary romance releasing in 2026 by Maria J. Murillo called The Experimento. Marianato's life completely falls apart, and so she gets and recruits her favorite singer in order to help win her ex-boyfriend back and kind of help her get her life together, but you know, there's a connection there. So this one releases in February, and I highly recommend you get it on your TBR for this year. And on a different note, we have Thirst by Marina Yuzik. This is translated by Heather Cleary, and this novel takes place in Argentina, and it follows two different timelines. In the first timeline, we have a vampire who just thirsts for blood and for murder and for killing in order, obviously, to live, but also like thirsts for like all these indulgences in life. And on the other side of it, we have a woman who like is on the other side of death and experiencing death all around her and managing death in that capacity. How those two worlds intersect, you will have to read Thirst in order to find out. I know I didn't announce this in the beginning, but this is going to be part 1 of 2 because, oh my god, I have been filming forever and I'm only halfway. What do you mean I'm only halfway? But there's a lot of genres of books, so I understand. So this is part 1, and part 2 will be posted hopefully tomorrow, if not Monday. But so let's get started with the final category today, and probably my favorite, memoir. The first recommendation I have is The Man Who Could Move Clouds. This is by Ingrid Rojas Contreras. This is the story of Ingrid's grandfather, but also of like her family and sort of the magical thread that runs through it because she comes from a long line of curanderos. This book was just so beautifully put together. There's actually like these pictures, I will try to find them online, of how Ingrid literally wrote this entire memoir, that it involved her grandfather dying, going back to Colombia, and like how she wrote the entire memoir, then literally cut it up and then moved all the parts around to create the puzzle that is this book. But it isn't a puzzle, it is a revelation. It is gorgeously written. Ingrid is such a talented author, and like I'm really hoping that she's publishing a book in 2026 because I need more. I think I've read this like 3 times since it came out a few years ago. And speaking of memoirs that I love, Poppy State by Miriam Gurba. Ugh. This is the personal through plants. Miriam uses this whole botanical experience that she had with her father to reveal things about her relationship with her father, as well as things about plant life in California, where she was born and raised and still lived. And this book is just so vital and beautiful. Miriam is such a poet in so many different ways. She plays with language in this novel in a way rarely see outside of poetry books, and yet she incorporates it into her writing about her life, about where she lives, and she turns a lot of her pain into this like sarcastic humor, and it is just a phenomenal book. You need to pick this up no matter what category you're putting it into this year, but Miriam deserves so much more love and attention for her writing because she is just one of the most miraculous Latine authors that we have here in the US, period, hands down. So that was 25 recommendations for the first half of Bien Leidos Latine 2026 bingo card. I'll be doing the next 25 recommendations tomorrow, so you can start setting up your TBR and figuring out your reading goals for the year. And I have brought my laptop because our closing credits are going to be all the thank yous to my Bien Leidos Bindery supporters, starting off with my Lectores members. Thank you so much, Orten, Libri Labra, Princess Peachy, and Val, your mortgage gal. And secondly, I wanted to thank my Libritos members. That is Alma, Angel Soul, Angie, and Eliza, Christina Vorcos, Book Nerd Buzz Erica, Celeste, Contras y Cuentos, Corazon, Denise, EBS, Grace Santa Maria, Hialeah, Hey Larita, I Am Bumble, J454, Jackals, Jenny, Just Joe, Katie, Kelly MC, Kindred, KMC84, La Mari Reads, Libros means books, No Life But Books, or Ormnancita, P. Marshall, Ravistron, I'm sorry if I'm saying these wrong, I'm trying to read them really quickly, Sandra Espinoza Lopez, Sarah's Bookish Macaroons, Sharda, Sodal Mar, Sonia Zavala, Steph, Stephanite, Susie Stefan, Tamara Honer, Thorana Reads, Twisted Apples, Vanessa Lilac, Maybe Rivas, Stephanie Nina, Styles Plenty. So thank you all so much for actually financially supporting me as a full-time content creator. And if you want to join Bien Leidos Book Club, whether you're going to be paying in order to have your name read at the end of this video, or if you're going to join for free, thank you all so much for following me and for joining along this journey this month and for Bien Leidos Book Club. See you tomorrow. Bye.